So I don't know how I stumbled across this video, but basically I saw Prager promoting Bill Maher, I haven't changed, the left has. And it shows a clip from one of his more recent shows, which we're going to talk about today earlier in the video. I think Bill Maher is what a lot of conservatives think George Carlin is, because conservatives have this opinion that George Carlin would have been a conservative if he was still around. He was a conservative, and I've made a whole video talking about how he really wasn't a conservative and he would absolutely hate modern conservatism, as he did hate conservatism when he was around. Now, the thing with Bill Maher is that he seemingly has a lot of credibility in liberal circles for being a voice of reason. Obviously, as a British person, he's not that famous in the UK, but how I've kind of seen him on the internet is through his atheism and his criticism of organised religion. And in my mind, he had some good ones of Christianity, but then I feel like his criticisms of Islam aren't very good at all and actually highlight his massive Western Chauvinism. And I think his contempt for Islam and Muslims as a whole informs his whole opinion of Israel-Palestine, where he's firmly on the side of the Israelis. Like, there really isn't much nuance in his opinion. He basically sounds like an American conservative if you get him talking about the Palestinians. So what I want to do today is look at Bill Maher and look at the stuff he said about, like, you know, the left have left him behind, he hasn't changed, it's all us crazy lefties that have gone too woke. And I just want to go back to some of his earlier videos in like the mid 2000s, early 2010s, and discuss like his overall politics and stuff that might be consistent and themes that might, you know, show themselves today. And just kind of talk about how this guy has always been bad. Like, this guy has never been even a good liberal. He's just been a guy who would often criticize the power of Christianity in America and also have some things to say about America's wars. But even then, he's kind of gone back on a lot of those things as he has gotten older. So we're going to be using a lot of clips in this video. I'm hoping it doesn't get copyright striked. It might get copyright claimed. I think it will be demonetized anyway, because we're going to be talking about like religion, the Iraq War, all these different things. So if you want to support my content continuing no matter what, please consider becoming a patron. I want to build as many $1 to $3 patrons as possible, and the benefits of that are you get my Nintendo Switch friend code and access to the private patrons Discord server. Also, help me get to 75k subscribers. For every 5k we get a new chocolate orange. You know, I'm so close to getting another one on this lovely pyramid. Also, check out my second channel, the Kavernacle Extra, where I archive my live streams. Also, follow me on social media at the Kavernacle on Twitter, on Instagram, and join our subreddit down in the description. I don't normally shout out previous videos for people to go watch. Consider maybe watching my Metal Gear Rising video from yesterday. I put a lot of work into it, and it's something I was really passionate about. I'm sad it has flopped as one of my worst videos in like the last year or something. I don't really mind too much. I knew it's not like technically on brand for my channel, but if you missed it, please consider going watching that one after this. So I showed Bill Maher being featured on PragerU, and if you're being featured on PragerU, maybe you're not such a good liberal leftist anymore. But it was taken from a segment of his show that was uploaded on YouTube on the 28th of January 2022. But basically about his beliefs never changing. It's crazy leftist, and, you know, we hate capitalism and stuff, and that's just too much for people like him.
Let's get this straight. It's not me who's changed. It's the left, who is now made up of a small contingent who've gone mental and a large contingent who refuse to call them out for it. But I will. That's why I'm a hero at Fox these days. I used to make fun of the left as much. Yeah, because they didn't give me so much to work with. Members of Congress tweeting things like cancel rent, cancel mortgage, and no more policing or incarceration, declaring that capitalism is slavery, canceling Lincoln and Dr. Seuss, teaching children they're oppressors and math is racist, making Mr. Potato Head gender neutral, and now an emoji for pregnant men.
Is there anything different from what he said there than a typical boomer right-winger? Also, Americans, shut the fuck up and stop cheering every single line this guy says. Not even everything he says is a joke, and you're whooping and clapping and cheering. Oh my God, it's just so cringy. I know a lot of Americans who follow me are like great people and everything, but these Americans, stop cheering at everything and being hysterical when you're in an audience of a celebrity. Anyway, I do find it laughable how cancel rent, cancel mortgages, and capitalism is bad is really too far left. Like, we've gone crazy, haven't we? The left have gone crazy. And I love how he thinks like all Democrats are going along with the squad. Because as we all know, Nancy Pelosi, Chuck Schumer, they're beholden to, I don't know, Rashida Tlaib and AOC. It's totally ridiculous. This just screams like a guy who's butthurt that some people on the left are now calling him out for his like Western chauvinism or his bigotry and thinking like, well, they've left me behind because they're no longer comfortable with me saying stuff that is offensive. I get that he's a comedian. He's not a very good one. He's not very funny. He probably thinks he is because his audience won't shut up. But a 66-year-old really rich celebrity with his own TV show complaining about the poor's not liking capitalism, rent and mortgages, I don't know. I think you're just a right-wing capitalist. We haven't left you behind. But this is where Bill Maher is today. But maybe you could say he wasn't always like this. He wasn't always, you know, old man yells at cloud. He wasn't always Principal Skinner being out of touch with reality. In the mid-late 2000s, he actually made a lot of sense. So I want to switch it up a bit. And now I just want to show you some clips of him talking about the Iraq War. Now, Bill Maher was against the Iraq War. Here's an interesting clip I find. He's talking to Joe Scarborough, and he's basically saying George Bush should be impeached for the Iraq War because it's such an absolute mess. Now, I want to get into a bit of the Western chauvinism I feel like comes from a lot of liberal critiques. They come from things like Western intervention, but let's have a look at this clip quick.
And let's not forget that the biggest scandal of all is the war in Iraq. The biggest scandal is that we have a president who, we won't even go there about lying to get us into the war, although that certainly is an impeachable offense, but who didn't study about the war. You know, when we learn, as we have in several books, that he didn't really know before the war began that there was a Shiite and a Sunni sectarian issue going on over there, to me, that's an impeachable offense. Well, I'm not the president. I'm not taking my country to war. It doesn't really matter if I knew about the Sunnis and the Shiites, but when you're the president and you're sending people to die, yeah, I think that's something probably you should have studied up on. I don't think you can allow the precedent of a president not only blatantly ignoring the Constitution and breaking constitutional law, but bragging about it.
Are you suggesting, like others have suggested, that with a stroke of a pen, George Bush has somehow abolished habeas corpus?
He sort of has, yes. Yes, you can disappear.
No, he hasn't. Did we provide
if you read the
habeas
bill,
corpus?
Yeah, but this goes well beyond enemy combatants. This Bush is the person who decides who's an enemy combatant, and he doesn't have to tell anybody. He doesn't have to report to anybody about anything.
I'm not saying it's like the most radical thing ever for a liberal to be calling for the impeachment of George Bush, but the media landscape was like a lot different back then. There was still like the hysteria of 9/11. Like, you had to kind of go along with a lot of these wars, and the media class especially was still going along with a lot of these things, even though you did have more people being critical, and you had obviously the rise of Obama, the rise of Ron Paul in this era, people who didn't like war. A lot of the media class were still complicit with the Bush administration and how they were handling the war on terror. And of course, Republicans and the media were constantly whipping up the war on terror. So I guess it is good that he is one of the few prominent people back in the day who were able to voice their opposition to the war consistently. And I just want to play you another video where he also talks about his criticism of the Iraq War.
Yeah, but at the beginning of our discussion, you were sort of poo-pooing the whole idea that terror alerts meant anything, that the war on terror meant anything, and now you're saying the war on terror is in fact worse than ever and a real threat.
Those two things have nothing to do with each other.
Why not?
The one was George Bush was fakely calling terror alerts to get people scared and vote for him in 2004.
No,
this is a
evidence of that.
But
people can be honest and stupid.
yes, and they can be honest and dishonest and corrupt, and he is both. But okay, George Bush is not corrupt.
What's the evidence of his corruption?
Oil companies.
Listen,
He didn't drag his feet on global warming because his money came from oil companies?
You can accuse him of mismanaging many things.
I do?
You can accuse him of being in over his head. You can accuse him of many things.
Right.
I don't think you can accuse him, in my view, of being somebody that's corrupt.
You're not serious.
Yeah.
When he was running.
I don't think you can.
When he was running in 2000, he said that he would cap CO2 emissions from power plants. He completely forgot that after he got into office. Why? Because the people who gave him his campaign contributions are the people he used to work for, the oil business. You don't really think that he's not aware of global warming, that he's suddenly got religion on.
You can even see in that panel show he was hosting how naive people would be in the media class about people like George Bush. Like, apparently, you can't call George Bush corrupt. You can't call George Bush corrupt. Literally one of the most corrupt presidents in American history. Literally fought a war for oil companies. Not corrupt, not corrupt. But like I said, that's how Bill Maher did consistently build a lot of credit with liberals back in the day, because he was this voice that was firmly against George Bush. And maybe you could see why people like him, because he was, no bullshit. He didn't agree with people just to be polite and stuff. So he could be this type of character who was quite grating to people. And even you saw the Joe Scarborough interview, someone who I guess would be willing to debate people and confront them on how they've been acting with these Republican presidents. I'm not going to linger too much on the Iraq War thing, but something I find lacking in a lot of Bill Maher's criticism of the Iraq War is actually the cost to Iraqi people and how many deaths there are, how many people were poisoned by chemical weapons used there, everything like that. And I think that will help us later when we start talking about other foreign policy things and Bill Maher's attitudes, and how he was, obviously in that famous clip, schooled by Glen Greenwald when they were talking about Islamic countries and why there is a lot of violence in certain parts of the world. But I've just showed you a couple clips to show you why people like Bill Maher, and I want to go a bit further. So another reason why a lot of people liked Bill Maher is because he was also one of the more prominent, outspoken atheists on TV. You don't even get a lot of open atheists on TV in America speaking about their atheism, but Bill Maher was someone who would do that. So I first want to show you some clips of him talking about Christianity, because this is what a lot of new atheism used to be good at back in the day, when the religious right was absolutely ascendant in America, especially with the Bush administration. That's why new atheism was appealing, even to people like me. It's like, here are some people finally pushing back against these nonsensical beliefs that are causing so much destruction in politics. It's refreshing because so many people skirt around the issue of religion in this context, and in America, this very, very big issue of religion, right-wing politics, white supremacy, and everything like that. So you liked people like Sam Harris, Dawkins, and Bill Maher for standing up to these powerful religious groups. But then, in my opinion, the problem with their criticisms of Islam is they don't take into account the power dynamics. And a lot of the time, they treat Muslim minorities in the West like they are powerful Christian lobby groups in America. But let's get on to his criticisms of Christianity first.
But I hate to be the skunk at the garden party, but that's why religion is dangerous, because it's completely fucking made up so that anybody can put anything they want on it, including horrific shit.
Atheists who are communists have killed a whole lot of people in the 20th century.
That's a dumb canard. Come on. And when you talk to people about it, they kind of are saying, I don't go to church because the only people who still go are assholes. And the refugee thing kind of brought this to light, because that's like a traditional thing the church always did. We bring in refugees. Well, the evangelical base doesn't want to let in refugees, so the young people are like, that's not very Jesus-y, so what's the point?
What you often say is that people who are religious aren't smart, right? They're dumb, they're stupid.
No,
right? And
no,
that's like three-quarters of the United States still. It's still 75% of the country if 25% is unaffiliated.
But that's not what I say.
Still prescribed.
In
Okay,
fact,
what do you
the
say?
movie Religulous starts with the question, how can otherwise intelligent people believe in a talking snake? Right. The question is, how can you just I think all of you are intelligent, and I guess you're all religious. I don't know how people can... I don't know how people can wall off a part of their mind and believe in something that's an obviously debunked Bronze Age myth.
So in that clip, Bill Maher was sitting in a panel of pretty much 4 Christian people talking about this stuff. You guys, especially if you're religious, might think it's like edgy atheist Redditor, but you have to understand, especially in the context of America, and I guess like online discourse as well, because of how much America influences like Western internet. It feels like, especially back in the day, that everyone was Christian, everyone believed this stuff, and people would just not take atheism seriously. And then it was refreshing for someone like Bill Maher to come in and basically just say it how it is. Like, it's ridiculous. It doesn't make sense. You have to believe nonsensical things. Traditionally smart people have to believe things that are clearly made up. And in my opinion, why a lot of people still believe religion is because most people don't actually know anything about their religion. I constantly tell people, if you're a Christian, go read about the Council of Nicaea and think about Emperor Constantine throwing out so much of your religion that loads of Christians believed in, and beliefs dating back to the original formation of Christianity, and then the Roman emperor just decided, I don't like that anymore, and then what do you believe today? So even if God and Jesus and all that stuff are real, your religion literally is not the same as the stuff they believed in because of the decisions of the Roman emperor. And I always say that you should come at religion from a historical standpoint first, because getting into the questions of like, is there a higher power? How was the world formed? And everything like that, I think you can get a bit like muddied in those waters where the historical evidence countering religion is so strong. I think it's something you should focus on because it just shows organized religion for what it is, a tool for control and a tool for manipulation, which is something that Constantine, the Roman emperor, used it to really, really great effect to unify a Roman Empire that was growing more religiously diverse. But Bill Maher also has some good sections where he like rebukes a lot of Christian arguments. So one argument that's become pretty prominent lately with the rise of secularism in the US a bit more is that Christianity is under attack. Christians are actually oppressed in America despite dominating all the major institutions and dominating, you know, the presidency, most people in politics being Christian. And some polling from a couple of years ago saying that most religious Americans wouldn't actually vote for an atheist, but apparently these people are oppressed. So it's just a good segment from 2015, which he did responding to this.
Please tell me, in what universe do the following statements make sense? Mike Huckabee says we are moving rapidly toward the criminalization of Christianity. Ted Cruz says there's no room for Christians in today's Democratic Party. 80% of Democrats in Congress are Christian, and 78% of Democratic governors. Ted also said there is a liberal fascism that is going after Christian believers. Going after? Fascism? I don't even believe in Christ, but for Christ's sake. Bill O'Reilly says if you're a Christian or a white man in the USA, it's open season on you. Yes, that explains all those recent videos of police shooting unarmed white clergymen. Rick Santorum says the treatment of Christians in America is so bad, we should keep in mind Nazi Germany, where you go from Christians, Jews obviously, but also Christians being not just persecuted, but put to death. Again, 70% of America is Christian. Who's going to put them to death? The Hindus? This idea that everybody on the left is plotting against Christianity and wants to wipe out religion is offensive to me. Because I'm the only media figure with a show week in and week out that says that. And I'll be damned if the credit's going to go to the entire left when I'm doing all the heavy lifting.
So Bill Maher even highlights there that there isn't a lot of voices on mainstream TV who like go after religion like he does. So again, like I'm saying, this is how he appealed to people. Like he's pushing back hard on these Republican arguments about Christians being oppressed, it coming from an atheist point of view in how ridiculous it is, obviously satirizing it. So like I said, from the clips you've seen so far, especially if you don't know Bill Maher much, you'd think this guy is just like a liberal who is pretty good at maybe countering right-wing arguments about war or right-wing arguments about religion. And I think that's why he still might have a bit of credit with some people who maybe aren't aware of maybe his more recent beliefs. But like I said, it's a different time back then, especially the early 2010s and the late 2000s, where there's literally like no people on TV countering like these religious narratives or countering the power of evangelical Christianity in America, which is still a massive political force. But now I'm going to get on to where like I don't like him, I massively disagree with him, and why I don't disagree with general criticisms of Islam as an organized religion. I believe like most religions, fundamentally it's like oppressive, promotes things like sexism, promotes things like violence. It's not unique to Islam, it's in Christianity as well, in things like Judaism, in things like loads and loads of religions. But again, my problems with Christianity as a religion extend to Islam as well. But the difference being is that Bill Maher seems to think that Islam is uniquely violent, uniquely evil. And it's just way worse than anything. Like the barbarity of Islam far extends anything Christianity did, or even if they were the similar at some point, it's clear now they are very, very different. And in my mind, even if that was true, which I don't believe it is, there are so many reasons for that, and it's a big reason why I switched from being like an atheist YouTuber to an anti-capitalist YouTuber, is because when people like this criticize places like Saudi Arabia, they're like, oh, well, it proves, you know, even if they have wealth, Islam is still barbaric. Even if countries are rich like this, the ruling class, they still are horrible and religious. Not to mention, Arabia didn't always used to be like what it is today. The Saudi royal family has been in bed with the US since the 1930s. It's propped up by the US, and they allow this regime to flourish. This state sponsor of Wahhabi terrorism, they allow them to flourish and have influence still. If the US cared about Islamic terrorism, they wouldn't prop up this state anymore. But it feels like Bill Maher is missing the economic analysis in his criticisms of Islam. So here's an interview he did with Charlie Rose talking about why Islam is like uniquely bad.
I think liberals should stop booing me for pointing out that Islam is not like other religions, that is a unique threat, and that
but it's not Islam you're against.
Howard Dean on TV the other day, and he said something along the order of, he said, the people in ISIS are, I said, I'm about as Islamic as they are. You know, distancing the vast numbers of Islamic people around the world from it. That's just not true.
It is true.
It is not true, Charlie. There is a connecting tissue between...
you mean, you know, behind every Muslim is a future member of some radical...
Let me finish.
I thought I was doing that.
There are illiberal beliefs that are held by vast numbers of Muslim people that I don't think...
Vast number of Christians, too.
No, that's not true. Not true. Vast numbers of Christians do not believe that if you leave the Christian religion, you should be killed for it. Vast numbers of Christians do not treat women as second-class citizens. Vast numbers of Christians
I agree with that.
do not believe that if you draw a picture of Jesus Christ, you should get killed for it. So yes, does ISIS do Khmer Rouge-like activities where they just kill people indiscriminately who aren't just like them? Yes. And would most Muslim people in the world do that or condone that? No. But most Muslim people in the world do condone violence just for what you think.
That?
They do. First of all, they say it. They shout it from the...
Vast majorities of Muslims
Absolutely.
say that?
There's a Pew poll of Egypt done a few years ago. 82%, I think it was, said stoning is the appropriate punishment for adultery. Over 80% thought death was the appropriate punishment for leaving the Muslim religion. I'm sure you know these things.
I know. Well, I do.
But to claim that this religion is like other religions is just naive and plain wrong. It is not like other religions.
So there you have some pretty like staggering Western chauvinism, that Islam is inherently violent. Most Muslims are more predisposed to violence because they believe in Islam itself. And the point I've always maintained when talking about this stuff, even if the doctrine of Islam was more violent than Christianity, I still don't think it's very relevant to discussion. So look at Joseph Kony, for example, and the Lord's Resistance Army. Totally barbaric. They're basically like ISIS, Christian ISIS, right? And there is still a lot of fundamentalism in African countries with Christianity. And the fun fact is, it's exported there by American Christians who know they can make them more radical than they are back home. Uganda's draconian laws on gay people were inspired by American evangelical pastors there. And it's also funny from the American context. Look at what the religious right are doing in America right now with the anti-transgender legislation, anti-gay stuff, anti-abortion, even anti-contraception right now. I saw recently in Louisiana. Like I said, he's missing the economic analysis of this stuff. Like countries like Morocco, countries, you know, in North Africa, they're not killing each other all the time. Most of these people live in peace. A lot of them are religiously diverse. Yes, there are a lot of problems with religious minorities, atheism, women's rights and gay rights, which may be more visible in countries in the Middle East and North Africa. But it's hard to develop your society when first most of you were colonized by Europeans until like the last 100 years. Some of you still have those effects from the Europeans now. And Europeans try to topple like all of your governments for rejecting their colonialism. And then they started multiple wars in the region. How can societies advance on things like social issues when European colonialists and American neo-colonialists are constantly stoking up religious hatred and sectarianism? And a country like Morocco, I think, is a good example because it has been independent for a lot longer than most of these other Islamic countries, despite having, you know, parts of its territory cut up by Spain and France. And it is a fair bit more progressive than other parts of the MENA region. But in my mind, the reason Islamic countries' governments often have laws that are more backwards on equality is a lot of times because they're propped up by the US, and the US don't care what they do in their authoritarian governments like Mubarak's in Egypt back in the day, or the Saudis, or they're still progressing as a society and need relative peace to start focusing more on social issues, while a lot of Western governments stoke up their sectarianism, which doesn't help them. I think it's worth remembering in this discussion, it's 2014 for this video, And a lot of people were going absolutely crazy about ISIS at this point. It was like, I guess, the Clash of Civilizations by Samuel Huntington was brought back again because they're like, Islam is incompatible with the West, refugee crisis, actually migrant crisis, and they're trying to import that ideology, which is not compatible with Western values. It's something like Sam Harris believes in, Bill Maher believes in, Douglas Murray believes in, and in essence, I think it's just Western chauvinism and it's racism, saying like Islam is the motherlode of bad ideas while always downplaying bad ideas in Christianity and Judaism, because bizarrely, as atheists, either support Israel over Palestine or just flat out support Israel like Bill Maher. Now, I'm going to play you a clip which he ran last year when Israel were brutalizing people in Gaza, basically defending all Israel's actions and defending any criticism of them as an apartheid state, which Amnesty International recently said Israel is an apartheid state. Harvard Law School recently said Israel is an apartheid state. How many presidents went to Harvard? That sort of institution is now saying that as well. It's irrefutable at this point. Only hardcore Zionists and American right-wingers believe this stuff. But here is Bill Maher basically going on a rant from an evangelical or some sort of Republican.
I don't think that's a defense for Israel engaging in possible war crimes in Gaza or engaging...
Well, Gaza fired 4,000 rockets into Israel. What would you say Israel should have done instead of what they did?
So
how could you not commit?
So, I mean, international lawyers are pretty clear that they have a right to defend themselves. They have a right to respond at military targets, but there was a sense that the response was probably a war crime because it did not sufficiently avoid civilian casualties.
But they purposely put the rockets in civilian places. That's their strategy.
Well, likewise, Israel's defense ministry is in a civilian area. I mean, both sides do this partly because they're crowded countries.
War is a crime. I mean, it seems like a silly argument when people go to war. I mean, there are certain things that are beyond the pale. This seems like, I mean, it was a normal war. People die in war. It's a horrible thing. But
I mean, we have developed laws of war precisely to restrain the inhumanity of war. We don't allow chemical weapons.
But I don't know how else you
targeting
respond to
civilians.
when you have I mean, what if Canada fired 4,000 rockets into America? I would submit that Israel did not steal anybody's land. This is another thing I've heard the last couple of weeks, words like occupiers and colonizers and apartheid, which I don't think people understand the history there. Beginning in the 20th, 19th century, they started to return to Palestine. We have the map. I want to show it. People forget what the map looks like. This is what was on the table at the beginning. The green is the part that the Arab population would have gotten. It's a good part of the country. It's the good part, a lot of it. Look what Israel has, a little sliver by the coast and the desert in the south. That second map is what Israel has today. Yes, it is a lot more. But doesn't it behoove the people who rejected the treat, the half a loaf, and then continue attacked? Hamas's charter says they just want to wipe out Israel. Their negotiating position is you all die.
The very just witnessed absolutely staggering Western chauvinism, basically saying there shouldn't be war crimes because if Hamas fires rockets, then Israel should be able to do whatever they want, basically blaming the Palestinians for what Israel have done to them, not mentioning the foundation of Israel was like based on conquering, massacres, genocide. Israel's expansion is based on those things as well. Yeah, we can talk about like the 6-Day War, or we can talk about the Yom Kippur War and invasions of Israel and maybe like defending themselves. At the end of the day, Israel is a settler colonial state. It's kicking out people who have lived there for hundreds and hundreds of years, destroying their homes and then giving them off to like American Jewish people who come over and become part of these Israeli settlers who are doing stuff that is illegal based on what the UN has said as well. The fact that he can't see one of the most militarized nations in the world treating these people like absolute garbage, keeping them in an open-air prison, depriving them of clean water while exporting clean water around the world. They aren't the bad guys. It's the Palestinians, because there's an insurgent group who's responding to this by firing rockets at Israel, who had the Iron Dome, funded by Americans, that shoots down most of these rockets anyway. Yes, it's bad when people die in war, although Bill Maher doesn't seem to think so, because war crimes aren't really a thing, apparently. But Israel imprison children without trial. Israel routinely kill unarmed Palestinians. Israel is basically what America was to the Native Americans. Israel is basically doing this stuff as a speed run. That's what I always say. Israel reminds me of European settler colonialism on acid or something, because it's happening even quicker, and it's happening in front of the world and happening in front of all these cameras, and it's happening with Western money. We are so complicit in this stuff, but people like Bill Maher feel like they have to go out of the way to defend Israel colonialism. People like him and Sam Harris will defend Israel as this like secular state built on colonialism and doing apartheid, because there are some atheists in Israel. Some of the founders of Israel were atheists as well, and it's not as mainstream like hardline religious as Hamas. Palestinians by and large aren't fanatics either. Again, totally gross. This guy even saying he's a liberal and the left have left him behind, when he comes out with stuff like this, is totally ridiculous. This guy even whining that he's a liberal and people treat him unfairly is ridiculous as well, when you come out with defenses of genocide like he has just done. Now, thankfully, Bill Maher's ignorance about how the West treats Islamic countries, including Palestine, was actually destroyed by none other than Glen Greenwald. How disappointing has this guy become that he essentially went from this to basically defending every single Republican on earth and doing cover for them. But let's have a look at this clip quick.
It's not our fault what came out. We didn't go into Egypt.
Well, we
wound up with the Muslim Brotherhood.
We didn't go into Egypt. We were supporting and propping up Mubarak for 30 years, even as we were cheering for all the Tahrir Square demonstrators as though we were on their side. It was our government that kept Mubarak in power, just like we've done across the entire Muslim world. And it's amazing for you to say that, well, look at all these Muslims. The minute you give them a little bit of freedom, they go wild and they start being all violent. How can you be a citizen of the United States, the country that has generated more violence and militarism in the world over the last 5 or 6 decades, and say, look at those people over there, they are incredibly violent? We play a significant role in what has been happening in the Middle East because we've been interfering and dominating that region in order to have access to the oil.
I wasn't talking about violence.
So,
I was talking about theocracy. That doesn't happen here.
No, well, okay, that doesn't happen here, but at the same time, Iran isn't invading lots of other countries and occupying them for a decade, nor are fundamentalist Muslim countries the way the United States is. So these things are interlinked because we are continuously interfering in that part of the world. And so to say...
Really, it's all our fault?
It's not all our fault, but when you send your military for 6 straight decades into other countries to bomb them, kill their children and women and innocent men, prop up dictators, yeah, you take responsibility for your actions and say, to the extent that that region...
That religion goes back 1,000 years before our revolution, so I don't think we can take all the blame.
I don't think we should. I think we should take a lot of it. And there's lots of bodies and corpses that have been piled up in the name of Christianity and Judaism as well.
Not recently.
Have you heard of the occupation of the West Bank and Gaza for the last 50 years, motivated in part by extremist views of Judaism, or the wars in Europe, or the fact that there were generals in the United States saying we have to go and invade and destroy Iraq, a country of 26 million people, because our God is bigger?
So no lies told there, surprisingly, by Glen Greenwald. And basically, you know, reiterating a lot of the points I made, Bill Maher just ignores the responsibility of the US government, how it is the most violent nation in the world, how it has destabilized the Middle East historically, killed millions of people there over the last, I guess, 70 years, and wiping your hands of it and being like, well, it's all because of the religion is pretty laughable. Thank you, Glen Greenwald, for exposing how hypocritical Bill Maher is, in that he'll say that Hamas firing rockets is like the worst thing ever and they deserve war crimes done to them. All Palestinians do, actually. But then just ignore the role the US has in these historic conflicts, which is a massive one, because I guess Bill Maher doesn't want to feel like guilt for being an American or something like that. And his statements like this also make me think about his opposition to the Iraq war. I think there's an element of people who are anti-war. They're not actually anti-war, they're anti-intervention, they're anti-US intervention, they're anti-making the US look bad, they're anti-wasting American lives, wasting American money. They don't actually hate war, they don't actually hate conflict, and there are conflicts they could get on side with, like Bill Maher has with Israel-Palestine. He's firmly taken a side if he believes it to be justified. So Bill Maher rejects Israeli colonialism, rejects Israeli apartheid, thinks the Palestinians are the bad guy, basically done this to themselves. And Americans from New York going back to Israel to kick out a Palestinian family from the home they've had for hundreds of years is apparently a very, very good thing because of something in, I don't know, 70 AD. So scratch a liberal and a fascist bleeds maybe doesn't apply directly to Bill Maher, but scratch a liberal and a massive Western chauvinist bleeds maybe. So one more thing recently, to see how gross Bill Maher is, here is him entertaining Ron DeSantis's Don't Say Gay bill as something that might actually make some sense.
Truth in that maybe kids that young shouldn't be thinking about sex at all. I don't think it's specific. I think don't say, it's not like you're not allowed to literally not say gay, but they just don't want teachers talking about it. They think it's the province of parents. I don't know what is going on with the gender as much. Let me read what part of the bill. It says, the measure would, this is from CNN, would require districts to adopt procedures for notifying a student's parent if there is a change in the student's services or monitoring related to the student's mental, emotional, physical health or well-being. Okay, then it says something LGBTQ advocates argue could lead to some students being outed to their parents. That phrase struck me as odd. Like, outed to parents? Like, shouldn't parents know everything anyway? The concept of without that's here. It's like we need to protect the student from the parents with the school. The school and
yeah, that's a political win.
So Bill Maher seems to be a guy who just buys into Republican framing of stuff and doesn't do his own research. So you can't understand why children and I guess young teens and teenagers wouldn't want to be outed to their parents, and why some people in the school might know their sexual identity or their gender identity, because you hear a lot of people, they often confide in teachers as a trusted adult away from their home, because back in their home, they can't be themselves because their parents are insanely bigoted. How many cases have there been where a child, a teenager, something like that, has come out as transgender or gay or whatever to their parents and been kicked out of their home? Sometimes even killed by their parents. This has happened. This is why you don't want laws making it so schools must out the children to their parents, because that is not a safe environment for them, and they might be waiting until they graduate high school so they can escape from their parents. It's insanely dangerous to try and normalize this as like, we shouldn't be teaching children about sex. I made a video about this, right? I read you some of the education young children get about this stuff. It literally just is like explaining transgenderism to like a 5-year-old, and it is like the most basic language ever. No discussion of things like sex. And that's another bit, like talking about being gay and transgender as like sex, like who you have sex with. Again, that is the right-wing framing, sexualizing kids. There is nothing inherent about having sex and talking about the act of sex when talking about people being transgender and gay. So those are all the clips I wanted to show you today, and you get a nice picture there of Bill Maher as someone who was often anti-Republican, often anti-Bush, anti-Christianity, anti the power of the evangelical movement in America, and he would be one of these people who would be on mainstream TV and would be outspoken enough about these things to the point where people would often find him a refreshing voice. Maybe not so refreshing. If I saw him, I would start cheering like a maniac, but again, for a lot of people, quite refreshing, especially in the early 2010s, mid 2000s. But then I've shown you that his views on religion have led him, in my mind, becoming a Western chauvinist, and while he can oppose things like the Iraq War, he then goes on to justify Israeli war crimes against the Palestinians. Like, there's no consistent ideology there. But again, a lot of people are like this. A lot of liberals are like this. They're not progressive when it comes to Israel at all. They'll justify apartheid. They'll justify oppression. They'll justify this racist system in Israel. Andrew Yang obviously came out and did it in the middle of all this stuff as well. And trying to justify Ron DeSantis's anti-gay, anti-transgender just sums it up. Like, he's saying, well, I didn't change. The left gone crazy because they hate rent, mortgage, and capitalism, and therefore transgender rights, and they don't like Israel. Like, the left's gone crazy. It's not me. What has happened is there is an emergent left, like an actual left. Not right-wing centrists and liberals like you, Bill Maher. There's actual leftists who have principles and actually subscribe to a leftist ideology. The Democrats are a right-wing party. They've been massively right-wing since Bill Clinton. The Republicans are far-right. If you identify with the Democrat mainstream, like Bill Maher does, then you are a right-winger. You're not a leftist. No leftists have left you behind, you old boomer. For a guy who's supposedly liberal, he likes to buy into far-right framing of certain certain issues. So that is it for the video. Let me know what you guys think of Bill Maher in the comments. If you want to follow me on social media, at the Kavernacle on Twitter, on Instagram. Support me on Patreon because videos like this are demonetized. Come join my subreddit in the description. And if you made it this far, thank you for watching.